Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Evil Geniuses Bleed Blue podcast. This is the show where I talk about everything Evil Geniuses, from League of Legends to Counter Strike to Dota 2 to Rocket League, you name it. Valorant, I'm gonna try to talk about it as to the best of my abilities. And this week I didn't really think there was going to be a whole lot going on. But because Dota 2 has started up, and Rocket League has been a new addition these past like few weeks, there actually is a little bit more to talk about than I originally thought. But I do have kind of a basic idea of what I want to go through. So obviously we're going to talk about Worlds first. Then we're going to transition into Dota 2 because for those who aren't aware, TI has begun. Which is obviously a big deal for Evil Geniuses, so I kind of want to talk about that as well. And then we're going to move into Rocket League, talk about the fall main event. We're going to transition then into Valorant, have a few things to talk about there, and then move on to the Counter Strike roster, where there really hasn't been a whole lot going on within any of the rosters as of this last week. But there's a few things to look forward to this week, and so we can talk about those. And then I do have some bonus topics that I'd like to talk about, and mostly they regard to the Counter Strike team, but it kind of just it depends if we're able to get to them, right? But I think they'll be pretty interesting topics, so I really hope I am able to. So without you know any further ado, let's begin talking about worlds, right? Let's see if I can spell this properly. There we go. Let's talk about worlds because yeah, guys, it was the end of worlds for Evil Geniuses this last week. It was pretty expected, to be honest. It wasn't a big surprise that Evil Geniuses was going to not make it out of this group. It was pretty much always going to be this way. But it was, you know what? It's weird, right? Because like it's awesome that they went. I don't want to say awesome. I don't ever want to say it's awesome to be 1-5, but I mean, I think if you look at the expectations and you look at the fact that Evil Geniuses was definitely seen as, yeah, this is probably a group where you go where the North American team just goes 0-6. I think getting one win, and even the way that they played in their other losses, I think is a positive sign. I definitely think that it was, it could have been much worse. It also could have been better, but things just didn't fall their way, and they made some mistakes in some areas that just didn't end up working out. But the second week, guys, was much better than the first week. So they started off the second week playing against G2, and they dominated G2. It wasn't even close. It was really fun to watch. The best, probably the best. I was just glad that one they finally beat G2. It only took like what 9 games or something like that. But then on top of that, just to do it in such a dominant fashion, I think was really cool to see. But that would be the last win for the North American team, as they then played JDG immediately after, and they had a good game plan, and the draft was really interesting. I think they picked up Fiddlesticks, and it was a really cool draft, really cool game. But it just JDG was just on their game. They looked so on point, and there was nothing EG could have done in that game to win. JDG was just the better player. They had the better players, and they played as perfect as you would have liked to have seen from JDG. And so there just wasn't really any opportunities for EG to capitalize on and win the game. So unfortunate loss there, but they definitely were competitive. And then, also nice to see because the first time they played JDG, while it did look like Evil Geniuses definitely should have won the game, JDG wasn't playing at their best. But in this game, it looked like JDG was playing much better, and EG was able to compete. And so I think that was overall it sucked, but it was still really cool to see. And then against Dam1, it wasn't as close as the JDG game, but it just didn't it wasn't bad. It just wasn't. They just didn't have enough in them. Dam1's the kind of team where you really have to capitalize on punishing their bot lane, and EG just wasn't able to really do that in this match, and it just kind of just things just kind of slowly. It wasn't like they got dominated or anything, but it was just kind of like slowly losing the lead. They kept slowly falling away, and they could never come back into it. Overall, I think JDG and Dam1 played pretty good against EG. I think they played pretty good in that second week in general. So it was going to be tough, but I think overall it was still a pretty good performance. I'm proud of how they played in the second week. I think it was much better than the first week. I think when I look at this at the NA teams overall in Worlds this year, I think that it was definitely disappointing. But obviously, with the context of it being the most difficult Worlds, I think people have seen in a while. I think it was definitely. I think EG definitely looked like the best North American team at Worlds. Every time that I was watching anybody's streams or anything like that, and they were talking about or podcasts, and they were talking about like, what have you liked to see? Obviously everyone was making fun of the fact that NA was just terrible. And it was kind of like, but the one thing that was consistent was people were saying, you know what, NA does look terrible, but EG actually looks like at least they're trying. At least there's some hope there, right? And so that was cool to kind of hear. I definitely think, like for example, if EG had been placed in the same group as 100 that 100 Thieves got placed, like if EG had ended up winning, in that matchup they played in the LCS finals in the semifinal, I think EG would have done much better than 100 Thieves. I think they actually, at minimum, get both wins over Flying Oyster and potentially even beat an RNG. I don't think they would have beat Genji, but they could have beat RNG. There was a chance for that. So I don't know. I just feel like if EG was put in a different group, there was a chance that they could have done. They probably could have gotten more wins. But even within their own group, I think they had opportunities for more wins. You look at that first JDG game that they played. You look at the second JDG game that they played. If JDG was off their game even a little bit, I think EG had a chance. Um, that first G2 game was brutal, and they couldn't execute their comp very well. I think that was probably like, look, when I look at this, they played 6 games at Worlds, and I think, in the group stage, and I think 5 of them were competitive. I think 5 of them were like, relatively competitive. I think the ones that were the least competitive were probably against Damwon. I think the games against Damwon were the least competitive games overall. I think the obviously the one game I'm leaving out in that group of 5 is the G2 game. That game was a stomp the first time around. G2 just looked dominant. So other than that though, I think they were competitive in all the games that they played for the most part, and I don't think this is a performance that they should feel ashamed of. Um, I think they're obviously going to feel disappointed because I know that they feel like they could have won more games. I mean, I think that first G2 game they were probably disappointed by how that went, and they knew they could have played better. I think the first JDG game they could have won. Even the second one they had a chance. Um, the Dam one game, the second Dam one game was a lot closer. There was maybe some opportunities there, but it just didn't pan out for them. So I think overall it's not a massively. I think this is probably like one of the best results you could have had for EG in this group, which is pretty depressing when you consider the fact that they went 1-5. But that's just kind of how NA is right now in comparison to all the other regions. And so that's just kind of how it is. But before we transition into Dota 2, the one thing I did want to talk about real briefly is the fact that there's going to be some roster caps in terms of uh, teams aren't going to be able to allocate as much money into their rosters next year in LCS. And so it begs the question, what's the future for this roster? I mean, I already think it's highly likely that Danny doesn't come back, unfortunately. I just don't know that he can mentally that he mentally was expecting something like the way that League of Legends is. And although obviously I would like to hope that he never gets any death threats or anything, any bad messages. I mean, it's just an inevitability when you play in a competitive environment as an esports competitor, as a sports competitor in general. You're going to get those messages, and I'm sure he got those. And maybe this just isn't the right path for him, right? So it's unfortunate, but if it's not for him, I don't want him to force himself into this position, right, where he's forcing himself to play because everyone keeps telling him he has the talent to do it, right? He should only do it if he thinks he can handle it, right? But so you're looking at a potential uh, a good chance of someone like of basically of Kaori staying on the roster. Um, you know, and then the question then becomes obviously, are they going to be able to, are any of the LCS teams going to be able to, with these new caps, going to be able to afford an Impact, a Inspired? I don't think so. Um, I mean, I don't really know how it would work with Impact, but I know at least for Inspired, I'm sure Inspired is looking at how Rogue is doing and how Europe is doing in general, mostly Rogue though, and is thinking like, man, that could have been me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that could have been me. I could have been on this roster, or maybe I could have been on a different EU roster and had a better chance at making it deep into Worlds, right? I think that's something he's definitely going to consider, and it wouldn't shock me if he moves back to Europe after this year. Not that EG was super disappointing this year or anything, but just the potential that he has as a player, I think he would have a much better team on a European roster. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he ends up going back to Europe, especially with these new roster caps. And so I think what you have to look for is, okay, well then who are the replacements? And the only replacements are obviously from the academy roster would be Tomio, who has been hyped up for a while as a really good jungler in the academy league. So I mean, I don't know how well he did in academy this year, but I know I've heard his name a lot. So that's definitely an opportunity. I don't know how Tomio likes to jungle or anything. That's something I would have to look into and talk about in a later episode. But that's definitely a decent replacement, I would say. And then the top lane replacement would, if it's coming from an academy roster. Again, I'm only assuming this is coming from academy. I don't know what roster moves they would make within the LCS currently. I mean, you could go for a contracts again or something like that, but I don't know. I don't know if he's pretty happy on CLG. I have no idea what you would do there, right? But like Surdy is their top laner in Academy. I don't really know how good he is as a top laner or anything really that much about him. So that's something that I would have to again look into and talk about later. But just kind of throwing those names out there as like, hey guys, these are potential options that you might switch to if this roster cap stuff ends up impacting them, ironically, or not ironically, but didn't mean for that pun to be there. If that ends up affecting their roster, right, moving forward. So, because I think it could have a massive impact on the LCS in terms of having more North American talent join these teams, and it's obviously going to take a hit to their international. I mean, I guess you could make the argument it's going to take a hit to their international ability to perform, but like when your international ability to perform is basically what I think North America won three games this entire worlds in groups. Like, I don't think it's that like who cares at that point? Like, you know what I mean? Like you need to build up the scene, endemic, the endemic scene or whatever, and kind of just uh, and you're gonna take a hit, but like at this point it can't get any worse. So anyways, that's all we're going to talk about with League. Just thought that would be an interesting thing to kind of briefly bring up because it's something that definitely I think you're going to have to pay attention to moving forward. But moving on, we have Dota 2, which for some reason Dota the second I can't type 2. It's not coming up. I don't know why it's not coming up on my screen, but it's not. So we're just going to say Dota, and we're going to do the international. I have no idea if that's going to come up on the perfect. I could just say TI-11, but like you guys get what I'm talking about. TI-11 has begun, ladies and gentlemen. It actually caught me off guard. I wasn't actually fully prepared for the games to start when they did, but they did. TI did start, and I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about is just the expectations for the Dota 2 team coming into TI because I wasn't 100% sure what the expectations were. I haven't really been following the Dota 2 team very much. I know they had roster changes earlier in the year. I know they went to the oh, what was the major? It was in the US. I believe it was in like Texas or something or something like that. Where is the Oh, I'm sorry, it was the Arlington. It was in Arlington. The Arlington major. I was following the results of the Arlington major when it was going on, and EG did not do well. They did really, 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 really bad at the Arlington Major, but they did. They had enough points to qualify for TI through the Arlington Major, so it was kind of a bittersweet, mostly bitter, very minimal sweet moment for the EG Dota 2 team. But yeah, so going into this, what I did was I kind of took a deep dive, and well, not really a deep dive, but I kind of was searching around for different power rankings, trying to find anything I could about people talking about, okay, well, where are teams ranked kind of coming into TI? What are the expectations for this Evil Geniuses roster? And so this is what I was able to find. So in the first one that I was able to find here, um, they put Evil Geniuses as they had tiers for the different rosters, right? It went from, I believe it went from let's see here, was it D or was it F? So they went from tier D to tier S. And they put Evil Geniuses at tier B. They put them as a B tier team. And this is what they had to say about Evo Geniuses. This was coming from Pinnacle.com. Let's see who wrote this. Ben Knoxville Steenhuisen or something like that. I don't want to, I probably butchered that, but anyways, what he said was, you could make a great argument for Evo Geniuses to go in any tier from A to D, so perhaps it is almost a sign of insanity that I'm putting them in the B tier after their LAN results this season. At ESL 1 Stockholm, they nearly set an any percent airport speed run with a 2 to 10 game result, winning a single game against Beast Coast and Boom Esports. The PGL Arlington major was better. They ended 6 and 8 in group stage games. Upper bracket was just one game out of reach, and lost to Entity in the lower bracket, a team who are looking excellent. Their individual experience will be invaluable at an event like TI11, but it all depends on if they are firing in a synchronized fashion. And so, as you can see there, they haven't performed well at these LANs, at these international events, right? For those who aren't aware, in the group stage, what happens is you play. It's a round robin, best of two, so there can be ties. And essentially, I want to say you play. Actually, I think you only play every team once. I thought it was every team twice, but as I look at it now, I'm pretty sure it's actually every team once. Because you got group stage day 1 through 2, group stage day 3 through 4, and then you get to the main event. So I think it's only a best of it's a best of 2, but you play each team once. But there's 9 teams in your group, so you're playing a total of 18 games. I believe. Or actually, no, there's more. I'm sorry, there's more teams than that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 teams. There are 10 teams. 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, there's 10 teams in each group. So you're playing 20. You're playing a total of 20 games to determine your seed. This is for TI. I don't know. You play 20 games to determine where you're going to be. And there is you can be placed in the upper bracket if you are. Let's take a look here. If you are, it's not really showing me very clearly, but I want to say basically I know there's a cutoff for if you're ranked in a certain place. Um, you can go into the upper bracket, and if you're in a certain other area, you get put in the lower bracket. Um, yeah, it looks like maybe the top 4 from each group get put in the upper bracket, and the lower bracket is comprised of the bottom or of the next 4 teams. So 2 teams don't make it through. 8 teams will make it through, but at least I think that's how this works. I could be wrong. I haven't watched a TI since since the last one I briefly watched, but uh, regardless, right? The point being, Evo Geniuses is kind of put as like a wild card team that they can kind of they could be really good, they could be really bad, right? And that kind of gets echoed throughout these other articles. So, for example, I went to Gosu Gamers and they had a Dota 2 ranking that looks like it's being updated as the TI continues. And in this at this point, so this is after some of the good results they've shown so far at TI, which I'll get to in a second. They are put as the 8th best team at the event, so that's pretty good. But that's also being updated with, I believe it's being updated with the recent results that have been coming in over the past week. And then somebody made a Reddit post. Let's see if I can find what's his name. It's posted. It was posted by True Lolzor. He posted his TI power rankings, his TI11 power rankings, and he put them as 13th, which did echo another article that I had read that I don't have up currently, unfortunately. But he put them as the 13th best team at the event. And he says EG has a lot to prove and certainly pays for the relative weakness of the NA region. Like Sonics, which is another North American team, their showing at the Arlington Major at home was disappointing by their standards, but they still managed to 2-0 Spirit in the group stage. For those who don't know, Spirit is the team that won TI last year. In pretty remarkable fashion, and is considered one of the best teams in the world. And it's them 2-2. So when they 2-0'd Spirit in the group stages, it is a stark reminder that they still have the ability to beat anyone. Few teams are more experienced than Evil Geniuses are walking into this TI. And the reality is, it's hard to know what version of EG we will see. Recent results invite rather moderate expectations, but EG is EG, and if they find the right tempo, they might as well be a contender for top 4. So, um, you know, overall, I think that's pretty good signs. I think. Well, I mean, it sucks in a way because EG has always been a good, or at least for the most part, they're a big Dota 2 organization in general. They're pretty well known, so you want them to perform well at TI, and they haven't really performed that well, guys. I mean, even the last TI, they didn't even do that much, really at all. So, really, really hoping for some good results, right? And then coming into this group stage, guys, they are 8-2. The only losses they've had was they lost 0-2 to Team Liquid earlier yesterday. And so, but other than that, I mean, they have been killing it. They beat PSG LGD, who, for those who don't know, is probably considered the best team in the world, or if not the top two, top three teams in the world. They beat OG in their matchup, quite convincingly. They did play Team Liquid. They lost to them 0-2, but they've beaten everybody else they've played 2-0. But PSG, LGD, and OG are the big wins that they got 2-0, and they were quite good wins. The only other top team that they have yet to play is RNG, who are currently 9-1, and that matchup is happening. I believe it happens tomorrow. So let me see here. Yeah, October 17th is when that is going to occur, and I think it's like really early in the morning or something, or it might be at like 6. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch that, but regardless, really good stuff from EG, and I'm hopeful that this continues on into the rest of this last day or so of the group stage, and that they can carry on into the playoffs and show the form they've been showing, because it's been really cool, and I didn't really expect them to do anything at this event. So you know, um, hopefully we've the roulette has landed on a tier team and not a D tier team, right? And so overall, super exciting, and I can't wait to watch more from the team. Currently, right now, guys, they are playing in like an enclosed, in a hotel environment, so that is a little bit unfortunate. Who knows? That I think that's something that should benefit EG if they have all that experience, right? I mean, I know some of these players have been around for a while. I've heard their names before for quite some time, so that could be actually a disadvantage that they haven't been able to play with on a stage with a crowd, right? So maybe that actually ends up helping them later on in the event if they make it that far. But yeah, overall, it's been really exciting to watch. I've been trying to get a little bit more knowledge into Dota 2 and learn more about the game so that I can watch these games and understand what's going on. But overall, I think it's been really, really good to see them perform as well as they have. So yeah, currently 8-2, the number 2 team in Group A. So hopefully that continues. Um, all right, let's transition into Rocket League. Rocket League, Rocket League. Not great news from the Rocket League team this time around. After I hyped them up last week and told you all to watch them because they were exciting and they beat the former world champions in the uh, in the fall main event, they lost to in the fall open main event, I should say. They lost pretty badly. They exited the event with a 1-3 record. They only beat Guild, and now they did beat them 3-0, but they were the only team that they beat. The other games they played were somewhat close, I guess. Some 3-2s in there that were pretty brutal. Except for their game against Quadrant. Quadrant kind of rolled them 3-0. It wasn't even that close. It was kind of disappointing to watch. Um, yeah, kind of sucks. I felt like their coordination was a little bit off. Maybe that's just they haven't had enough time to get used to each other. But it felt like we really struggled offensively. It really just felt like all the time we were having to play defense, and the few moments that we were on offense, we could never capitalize, and there wasn't enough uh, you know, I don't know. The coordination was just maybe lacking a little bit, or the rotations were, and it was it was tough to watch. Because of the previously having good results, right? But I think with a new player, maybe that's expected, right? And it's just going to take a little bit more time. So hopefully they're going to perform better later. So to kind of follow up on that is the next thing that is happening for them is the Fall Cup, where they are already in the closed qualifier due to their how well they did to get into the Fall Open in main event. So because they made the main event of the Fall Open and they were in the bottom 8 teams or whatever, they immediately get placed into the Fall Cup main or closed qualifier. So I'm not sure when that is happening, but I obviously they first have to go through the open. There's teams that have to go through the open qualifier. So after the which has not occurred yet. So after the open qualifier is when the closed qualifier will happen, and hopefully EG can make it through that and get into the Fall Cup main event. Um, so. And hopefully they'll be able to get more points in the through the Fall Cup than the Fall Open. So um, yeah, hopefully better results then. But for now, we are going to have to put that one on the afterburner and transition into Valorant. Now, there's not going to be a whole lot to talk about here because nothing's happened. Real quick, I guess I can just get this part out of the way. The Game Changers roster, we talked about them briefly last week and kind of had some expectations. Didn't think it was going to go particularly well, but was hoping that maybe there'd be a lower bracket run because I didn't think they were going to beat Complexity. They didn't. They lost 2-0 against Complexity. They were both 13-9 games. Yeah, it was close somewhat. It kind of gave you maybe some slight hope, maybe that they could make a somewhat decent lower bracket run, but it didn't happen because they ended up playing Misfits Black, and Misfits Black just absolutely rolled all over them. Misfits Black ended up actually going all the way to the lower final. Um, you know, so just 2-0ing teams as they went. So kind of unlucky to get Misfits Black in the lower round one, but they did, and they got 2-0'd, and it wasn't that close. So pretty unfortunate for the Evil Geniuses Game Changers roster. But I think the bigger news is really it hasn't even really been announced yet, but saw some players from EG, like Boostio, Jogamo, Calm, I think as well, posting like their little like the classic thing that every player does when they sign a contract or they're memeing where they sign like it's the little like it's the GIF with the person signing it the contract or whatever. Um, I don't know if that's actually it hasn't been confirmed yet, right? So I don't want to. I mean, look, it's one of those things where I wouldn't typically believe it if there was no news beforehand or there was no like nothing interesting beforehand to suggest that this would be the case. But because it's been pretty obvious that Evil Geniuses made pretty much no offers or did not seem to care about making offers on the best players in the world, it would seem pretty weird for the players to just fake, the contract signing thing. I think at this point, all signs point to that Evil Geniuses will make zero roster changes heading into, the new season of VCT, which I think is a fucking shame, and I think it's a fucking disappointment, and I think it's a mistake. I think it's a massive mistake. I think if Evil Geniuses seriously thinks that they're going to be able to compete um, with this current roster in the next VCT stage, when you have teams that are quite clearly have made massive roster moves to try to win the whole. Like, you don't understand the roster moves that these teams are making. They're not making roster moves to like perform well in their North American in the Americas League. They're doing moves that are like, no, we're not only going to win the Americas League, we're going to win the whole fucking championship. Okay, that's the moves that these guys are making. And Evil Geniuses have not made any moves. And like, look, yeah, like I said like a billion times, I do like the players. They're good people and everything. Like, they have a lot of potential, right? But like not the potential to beat these teams. Like the signings that are happening are ridiculous. Like Sentinels is signing is keeping tens and then is signing some of the loud players, which listen, it's a cool idea. It's a winning. It's like one of those. It reminds me of a Vitality move in Counter Strike, where it's like they're making a big international move, and it's like this move could go super well and they could just win everything, or they could struggle to speak English and it could kind of fall apart. Who knows? But it's still a big signing. It's still like a move where it's like, nah, we don't just care about Americas. We're trying to win the whole freaking thing. Cloud9 might be signing Ye. That might get announced tomorrow. Is that they might be, or I guess for you guys today, that Ye might be going to Cloud9 and they're building a super team. 100 Thieves made roster changes to get Cryo, and they already had a team that was making it deep into international events. Um, NRG is signing the core of the Optic Gaming roster that has been the best team in the most consistent best team in the world, maybe besides Loud. So like these teams are all making massive roster moves, and EG has done absolutely nothing, and they're just keeping this like project roster, and I just don't understand how that makes any sense, you know. And I think what these people need to realize is, what the fan like what EG's players, the players' families, and the organization should understand is like this isn't the kind of decision you make, and we come to next year. If you don't provide results now, like you will be scrutinized heavily. You will get all the pressure laid on you. You will become the laughing stock of Valorant. It's going to happen, right? If you do not perform, because you're one of the few organizations that got selected for this rigorous process to be selected. And if you don't make any moves and you just act like, oh well, this will work out because we're a family, and then you end up performing like shit next year, like you're not getting any sympathy from anyone. Okay, like you had all the opportunities. You literally had the best opportunities in the world. You have plenty of money, and you were basic, and every Valorant organization was told like, yeah, basically you can just sign whoever you want as long as you have the money and the willpower, Like as long as you have like the money, the willpower, the idea, the plan in place, like you can sign the best player in the world right now in theory. And they just didn't do it. They made no moves. So I have no sympathy. Like, how has Dicey's not been picked up? How are these players that are just so good not getting picked up by EG? It makes no sense. And so, look, I'm not I'm not trying to like. All I'm saying is you're asking for it. You are asking for this. So if you do not perform next year, I'm putting all the pressure on you because you deserve to be put all the pressure on because you have to consider this, and nobody's thinking about this. But what Evil Geniuses is doing is selfish. Here's why it's selfish. Because there are players that are better than these EG players who are not getting signed, who have to question whether or not they're going to continue to play Valorant, who have to question what their professional lives are going to be moving forward because some of these organizations are just pulling out of Valorant because they don't have a major slot anymore. Like these are things that like look, I want to be nice to these guys, I really do, but like when I don't, it, you got to earn it at this point. Like you have to earn your slot in this America's League. This is a cutthroat league. Like if you're not the best, you shouldn't be here, and there's plenty of NA talent, so there ain't a there shouldn't be a worry or a concern about that. So I mean, you look at the rosters like FaZe Clan and Version 1, and some of these players that were on these teams, that just aren't ever going to get picked up or signed, and you're just like LG, even for example, like someone like Proto, like how have you made none of these moves? Like you can't sit there and tell me that this EG roster has players, that all of EG's players are better than every other option available. It's just not true. I think the only players that you can look at on this roster and be like, you know what, like yeah, they showed a lot, is probably Boostio, Jogamo, and if you had to throw, and if you could throw in a third, it would maybe be Calm, right? But I think other than that, I just don't know how you haven't made any roster moves. It's just really disappointing. And overall, I just again, if you want to stick to your guns, that's fine. Like I don't agree with it, but what do I know, right? Um, that's your decision to make at the end of the day. But like, just know, like, we're gonna be coming with the fire next year if you don't perform. Like, that's just gonna be how it is because you had every opportunity to turn this ship around, and you've done nothing. You've done absolutely nothing because you want to get on this. I'll talk about this potentially later, but because Evil Geniuses is now a talent development org. That's what they are. They're not the org that they used to be. Um, anyways, I know that was a little bit harsh, but that's just it frustrates me when you are given an opportunity that I've never seen before in esports, where you literally can sign any player in the world, and you've done absolutely nothing interesting at all. Um, and it's not like your team showed massive results before, so what's to say they're going to show massive results 6 months from now when teams have better rosters? I don't think your scaling is that high, personally. Um, moving on to CS:GO. Moving on to CS:GO. We're really briefly just we're going to talk about the some of the other rosters, the secondary rosters. I guess first I'll just get EG Black and EG White out of the way before talking about the female team because I do have a little bit of a slight rant regarding that team. Um, it's kind of piggybacking off of what happened last week. So EG Black is about to be in ECL playoffs, guys. It's happening this week. I already talked about it a couple weeks ago. I think it was episode 5 or something like that. So I'm not really going to get into it this episode, but it's going to be a tough road. But I'm overall excited to see how they perform, and I think it's going to be really cool to watch them play. I hope Wiz continues to show his form. I hope Chop, is showing good form. And this is something that's actually really interesting to think about is that they just had a boot camp in Europe with all the other guys, in Stockholm, I believe it was. So like that's super cool, right? Like they got a lot of European experience that not many that probably none of these other ECL teams are going to have. So I think overall that's a massive advantage, compared to all these other teams. So like who knows, man? That could seriously pay off dividends, and I'm actually excited. I think this team could definitely punch above their weight because I don't see them as a favorite to win this event. But who knows? Maybe that European boot camp could actually do really good wonders for them, right? And could they could show some serious results moving into ECL. So we'll see. I'm excited for that. Starts this week, guys. As for EG White, there's nothing going on. I might touch on them later in a bonus topic. If I get if we have the time. But let's briefly move and touch on the female roster because, guys, nothing has happened. It has not been addressed at all that Picky Kiki is banned with 3 accounts. Um, I don't know how it's not being addressed because, like, guys, this has implications on her competing in the event. Like, I'm pretty sure they've made whatever the main event is in for GG. Well, I was gonna say GG for all, but it's not coming to me right now. But essentially, like Face It slash ESL, they're not. The ruling is essentially like you can't have a ban on your Face It account or your ESEA account and compete in a tournament. So like, I don't really understand how this hasn't been addressed and how like it seems like they were just kind of sweeping it under the rug, you know, and just not talking about it. I think that's pretty shitty of them. And so I'm just upset because I'm like, how has it not been addressed? It could have implications for that team in the event. They may not even let them compete, and if they do let them compete, then what the fuck? Like, I guess Evil Geniuses just gets to have a buy on every and all cheating scenarios because like reasons because they have money. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's fucked up. I think she should be kicked from the roster. I'm being honest. Like, I liked her as a player. Like, she seems like a decent person, I guess. I mean, I don't know how decent you have to be to cheat on 3 accounts. Like, who knows? But I could see a world where you're just messing around, you get banned on 1 account, but like 3 accounts is kind of ridiculous. Um, I liked her when I watched her on the team, but like at this point, like if it's gonna cost you, being able to play at the event at full power, like I think you just have to make the move at that point. So, I don't know, man. That's just frustrating that it's just been swept under the rug. It just seems really, but leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and it's not right that they are able to do this. And I think if this was anyone else, obviously the move would have happened already. Um, Moving on from that, going to talk about the main roster. They are about to compete in the Blast Fall Showdown. Because for those of you who do not remember, they Evil Geniuses, the main roster essentially, they did not do well at groups for Blast because they had Rush standing in, and this was when the roster was first. This was the first event that they had when the new roster was created, and they just didn't have a lot of prep time, so they didn't do particularly well. So they're in the Showdown. For those who don't know, the Showdown is best of threes. It's the North American Showdown, so there's no European teams, but it's best of threes, but it's online. So it doesn't really matter who you're playing against. You have a chance of losing because it's an online event. Anything can happen. And the first game they're going to be playing up against is going to be against Fluxo. Fluxo is, ooh, this team's a little bit scarier than I originally thought. They have Phelps, they have VSM, they have Woody. And so that is going to be an interesting roster to play against in the first round. Definitely not the easiest matchup in the world, but hey, listen, none of these matchups are going to be super, super easy in the sense that it's an online event. You don't know what's going to happen. But I do expect Evil Geniuses, in all honesty. I think they're expected to just make the final at the very least. I think they're expected to make the final against, you would like to think, Complexity. and have a best of three against Complexity. I would like to hope that they would win that best of three. I think EG has shown to be the better team than Complexity, but who knows? We will see how it turns out. But I think EG should be one of the favorites to make it through this Blast Premier Fall Showdown. And hopefully the upward trend continues and they make it past the showdown and they can go into the Blast Premier, what is it, the fall final. So hopefully that is the case. Because only one team can make it out of the Blast Showdown, guys. It doesn't matter if you're top two, you got to be top one. So hopefully they are able to do that. And like I said, they're playing against Fluxo on Friday. So best of three on Friday. I believe, what time is that match? Does it say? I'd have to do math. I'm not doing that. But it's on Friday, guys. So if you want to know, just check HLTV on Friday or Thursday night or something and figure it out. But yeah. Other than that, I just want to say thank you to the EGCSGO team for doing the amazing work that they've done, getting this roster to the point that it's at where they're competing against Liquid very competitively in a series that they definitely could have won, and looking like they just keep moving on an upward trajectory. I expect it to continue. Um, Even if they don't perform in this showdown, I don't see it as a massive like indication of where the roster is at. I really think the RMR was the best indication. The RMR mixed with Pro League. I don't really, if they flub the showdown, losing to a 0-0 nation. I'd like to hope they don't lose to Fluxo, right? But if they lose to a 0-0 nation or a complexity at the end, like, or an MIBR at the end, like, yeah, it sucks. They're obviously a better team than those teams, in my opinion, except for you can make the argument for complexity, except their recent performances haven't shown much. I just think like it wouldn't matter to me too much, mostly because one, it's an online event. Two, I'm sure Evil Geniuses cares a lot more about the major right now than they do this showdown. Just kind of thinking along those lines. But I think we know kind of what this team is and what they have shown, right? But I'm really thankful for everything they've done. I'm really thankful that I finally have a team that I can be happy about in CS:GO. It's been so long since I've been able to be excited for a team. It was really cool. I got to message Hext on Twitter and kind of I was kind of just like, I'm not gonna ask you any hard questions. I just wanted to know, like, did you ever expect yourself a year ago to be in this position? And hearing, I could just tell, you could just hear the happiness that came out when he was saying, like, how excited he was about, how he didn't even think he'd be here a couple months ago. He didn't even think he'd be going to a major. So it's just so crazy, or even have stickers for that matter. Like, it's it's an awesome thing. And I think this roster has shown so much. I really enjoyed the picture that got tweeted out by, I believe it was Munster, where it was all 15 players at Stockholm, just like sitting on like the staircase. Like, it was so cool. I've saved that picture. That one's just like, I'm keeping that. It was such a cool picture. I can't like it. My gratitude is like, it's so nice to see, man. Like, you know, I've watched this team lose so many times. Like, it's cool to see a roster that's not just improving, but improving at a rate that they're improving at. And it looks like everyone's on board. Everyone is supporting each other. You know, um, it looks like ideas are getting tossed around all the time. They have different perspectives all over the place. I really like where this roster is going. And I really hope that they perform well at the major, because I think they've shown so much growth, and I hope that it continues into the major and that it doesn't just collapse. That would just be really tragic. But yeah. So thank you. I guess briefly I can talk about my bonus topics. We have a little bit of time here. Just kind of wanted to touch on the marketing. um, I really think, and this is going to kind of go with two different branches when it comes to the marketing. One aspect is going to be just their lack of marketing in general, their lack of content, which I've stressed in the past, but I'm going to just bring it up again. And especially now that a lot of the big events are happening, there's just still no content. Um, and then the next one is going to be more so toward, I think people have the wrong idea of what the Evil Geniuses brand actually is now compared to what it was before, when who was the owner of Evil Geniuses before? Let me see here. Because I know Nicole is now the owner. I don't know why it's not coming to my mind immediately in terms of who was there. Alex Garfield. Alex Garfield, who's a Philadelphia native, which personally I appreciate because I'm a big Philly fan. Uh, but But yeah, Alex Garfield. I think Alex Garfield and Nicole are handling Evil Geniuses in completely different ways, and I think it affects the marketing, it affects the brand, and I actually think it's why they made their logo change. And I think it's it's a big reason as to why um, I don't know. I just think people have the wrong idea of what this Evil Geniuses is now, and I kind of want to talk about it because it is a consistent theme that is permeated through every esport that they've been a part of. That Nicole has been able to kind of have input or has had input on, which is basically everything. I would assume. And so I think it's an important distinction that should be made in terms of their management styles because if you like Evil Genius in the past with Andrew Garfield or whatever, it's not the same now. And so that's something that I wanted to touch on. So first off, in terms of the lack of marketing content, I think this is a fucking shame. It's a crying fucking shame, and I don't know how they haven't hired anybody to do this yet because you look at orgs like TL and they've nailed it. I mean, for God's sakes, I'm watching orgs from friggin' teams like Sprout in Counter Strike who are posting like vlogs about them going to the major qualifier. Like, how has Evil Geniuses still just done no content? It makes no fucking sense. The only content they make they do content in like in not even in waves. It's just like every like 2 to 3 months they'll make like a really well produced video. Like this time it was the world's video before groups, right? But like they don't do and like the only content they've done that's been like a consistent thing that they can pump out. It has a formula and like, but it's good. It's good content. Is the League of Legends series they did, where it was kind of like chronicling, each week of the LCS team, right? But other than that, they have done zero content. Like, dude, I want to know these players. Like, dude, I don't get to hear about the freaking Dota 2 players, dude. Evil Geniuses, you're like a storied org in Dota 2. Like, you've won a TI. Like, how do I not know anything about your players? Some of these players, mind you, have been in Evil Genius affiliated with Evil Geniuses for a long time now. Like Fly, for example, he was with EG for a while, then he got removed, and then he came back. Like, how do you not Arteezy, easy for Arteezy? Like, how has there been no content around any of these players on Dota 2, especially now that they're at TI? It makes no freaking sense. The Rocket League roster, you have you have like this all German, like roster with coaching staff and everything, they're like they talk on Twitter all the time. Like, I'd love to know more about them. I'd love some content. Send some marketing people out there and get them to do some content. I think they're all living around the same area. I don't know how you haven't done this. I think they boot camp or whatever all the time. Like, that's just a free opportunity for content right there. I want to know more about Ivan and Tox and Catalysm and the coaching staff and I want to learn more about these people, right? I just don't know anything about them, you know, other than the stuff that I read. Valorant, they've done some content around the Valorant team, but I'd like more. I think Calm, for example, is super cool because he does a lot of those like videos, he does those comms videos, no pun intended. I think those are cool, and I like the content that Calm does. He's like a big streaming personality. I don't think Evil Geniuses take advantage of that enough. They did it with Stewie, and they're not doing it with Calm, although fuck Stewie, so whatever. Had to throw that one out there while I can. Every episode I'm just gonna kind of just slide that dagger in there, because I just hate him so much. um, uh, Anyways, I might again when I have an off episode where there's not much going on, I might talk about my why I dislike Stewie the way that I do. And if you can't tell, it's because it's hatred that is even it's the worst type because it's like I liked him so much and now I hate him. So it's like you've hurt me, emotionally. Anyways, not the point. The point being there's no content. There's no content around the Counter Strike team. Like there's on any of the rosters, there's zero content. Like guys, you just went to the major qualifier. You didn't qualify for the major last year. Though, could you have at least done some content where you're just doing vlogs? Like, dude, the Team Liquid vlogs are like perfect. Like, how have you not done anything like the Team Liquid vlogs? It's not that hard. You've done it in League of Legends. Why can't you do it in Counter-Strike? Why can't you do it in Valorant or in these other leagues? Like, I assume, by the way, that they're going to do it in Valorant next year because Valorant and LCS are going to be in the same building. So I'm assuming that that is going to be the case and that these players are going to be their journey throughout the season is going to be chronicled like it has been in League of Legends. But I just don't understand how it hasn't happened for CS:GO, for Dota 2, for Rocket League. How has it not happened? It makes no sense, and it's disappointing. And I don't want to hear about how difficult it would be to get people out there to do stuff like that. You have the money to do it. Do it. It's that simple. What EG is seriously lacking is a fan base. And the only way that you can compensate for not having a fan base, there's two ways. You either super heavily cater toward marketing, which they have not done, so that's already off the table. And then the second option is you just have a really fucking good team all the time, and because your team is so good, you naturally generate fans. That's kind of worked in League of Legends, but spoiler, as I'm about to get into, Evil Geniuses does not look like the type of organization that really that puts winning as the top priority. That's just not how it is, right? They're not the organization that's going to make the massive signings in every esport they're in, like a G2, to try to get the best rosters possible in every game they play, and to win the biggest events in the world all the time. You're not going to see that out of EG anymore, guys. Which is why it's a perfect transition to talk about what's my next little mini rant, which is just that Evil Geniuses is not the same organization that they were under their previous management. And why do I say this? I'm bringing this up because a lot of people like, and I understand it, right? Like Thorin, for example, has talked about this, how he's like, you guys are evil geniuses. Like, yeah, the CSGO roster is good. It's made improvements. It's better than the last roster, but it's not up to your standards, which should be to win the major, right? Evil Geniuses is supposed to be one of the biggest in the world. They're supposed to be winning the biggest events, right? Your roster isn't doing that, right? So it should be considered, you should be doing better than this, right? You should be looking for bigger signings, right? And I agree with that. I do. And I think that should be the expectation. But I think, well, I might challenge it slightly and say that it may not be the proper expectation anymore, guys. Evil Geniuses used to be the organization in NA that would make all the big signings, that they would do exciting, big signings to try to be the best in the world at whatever esport they competed in. This is not the current state of Evil Geniuses. In the time that Nicole has taken over Evil Geniuses, I think it's been pretty apparent that what they care about is having a family-oriented environment. So they don't like kicking people. They do not like removing people from any rosters. They try to wait until the last possible moment where all hope is lost to finally remove a player. The only exception I can even think of is probably the League of Legends roster, but in every other organization or any other team that they've had, they seem to really try their hardest not to remove anybody. And they generate deep relationships with their players, and they seem to just not want to cut people, which is an honorable thing, but it is not the evil geniuses of old. The evil geniuses of old wanted to win, and they would do whatever it takes to win, even if that meant kicking players after a certain period of time if they were not performing. Um, it's just a different mindset, and I don't think people are taking that into consideration. Now, another thing to take into consideration is that Evil Geniuses looks like the type of org that now wants to be heavily involved into rising the new talent. And it's not just rising, bringing up rising talent and then selling them off. It's more so bringing up rising talent, developing that talent to then become the best team in the world. That's the path they want to take. They're taking the harder path. They don't want to take the path where they just look at all the best players that are available to them, purchase those players, and try to make the best team in the world to win. What they're like a Team Liquid type of style. What they're trying to do is they are just trying to develop talent within their region and build a strong foundational relationship there, and have a good relationship with making sure they're getting coaches that know how to develop talent within their respective esports, and discovering those talents, and then developing those talents, and you know forming them into the best players in their region, and then trying to become the best in the world. That's the path they're taking, right? And that's consistent within their League of Legends roster. Obviously, Peter Dunn does a great job scouting talent. They have a very good coaching staff. The League of Legends team for Evil Geniuses is really strong. They have strong players in their academy roster. With like for example Tomio and Danny and Jojo Pyun and all those. I mean, obviously, I think some of those guys didn't participate in the Academy League, but they've come from Evil Geniuses, right? I think that's really important to EG, and that's just in the League of Legends roster. Now, I don't really know about Dota 2. Even in Rocket League, they've signed an all German roster, which I don't think is that normal. I don't think Germany is typically like the biggest region in Rocket League or anything. But they're a roster that was on the rise. They signed a roster that was when they had Rizex, they were just a team that was just on the rise. They had really good cohesion and chemistry, and they were just on an upward trajectory. And Evil Geniuses was all about that, right? Young, upcoming talent, right? In Valorant, it's the same thing. That's why they're not making any roster moves. They develop talent. They've created a family environment within their, or at least an environment where the players feel super comfortable with the CEO and the whole management staff and everything, and they feel like a family. And it's a bunch of rising talent, and they want to keep that, and they want to become the best in the world with that. Counter Strike, same thing with Hext and build and making two separate rosters and trying to build back the NA scene back from the ground up, right? It's the same thing. You can see it in every esport they're in for the most part. That's just who Evil Geniuses is now. They're not the roster that they were before. They aren't Team Liquid. I think Team Liquid, I compare to Team Liquid because Team Liquid seems to be like the Evil Geniuses of old, where they're signing the big players from internationally. They're trying to make the big budget moves to try to make the best teams in the world, right? That's what they want to do. So I think it's just a difference in philosophy that I don't think people have really touched on too much. And I think it's quite apparent at this point that that is the path that EG is taking. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about that because I don't think people are mentioning it. And so people are coming up with these expectations of it's Evil Geniuses, they should be the best in the world. And I do think that's a fair assessment to put on them considering the amount of money and influence that they should have, right? But at this and the history that they have, it's really the history that they have and the money that they have that leads to this expectation. But the problem is that that's just not the philosophy that Evil Geniuses is under now. They have a completely different philosophy about how they want to approach different esports, and I think that's quite apparent at this point. And it hasn't really been caught on by everyone because it's looked as it's frowned upon because you're an organization that has had so much success in esports in the past. People genuinely feared Evil Geniuses when they played against them. They knew they were a strong team in most of the esports they were in, and that's just not who they are now, right? And now they're kind of seen as a laughing stock in some of the esports that they're in. I think the only esports that they're in that they aren't laughed at is probably at this point League of Legends, Dota 2, Rocket League to some degree. But Valorant and Counter Strike, they're just going to be seen as laughing stocks. And the problem with Valorant too is I don't know where they're going to get a coaching staff, like a deep coaching staff that understands how to find the new talent. When like someone like obviously DDK and Sean Garrett should have been the pickup there, right? They should have tried to go after those two before 100 Thieves could have gotten to them. They didn't do that, and I think that's a huge miss, right? Because I think those are the guys that definitely can find new talent. And if I saw them doing that, I'd be like, well, if Sean and DDK wanted to keep these players, like I can't complain. You know what I mean? But that's not the case, right? Um, so I just think that's an important distinction to make when it comes to how they run their organization and the expectations that are set for them, because the expectations are high for them because of their past and because of the money they can utilize. And but that's not really that's not the way they want to win anymore. They want to try to win in a different way, and it's a much more complicated and difficult way, especially if you're going to do it with NA talent, at least in Counter Strike, because the NA region is so weak. So you're going to see, I think Evil Geniuses is the type of roster that's going to ebb and flow in terms of strength, along with the strength of the North American region in general, because they are a organization that strongly wants to develop North American talent. Um, Talking about developing North American talent, we'll briefly transition to the Blueprint project overall, and kind of I want to mention my opinion on. I mentioned this before, how I thought EG White should be a roster that should be reconfigured entirely so that they can compete in the We Play Academy League, and then you keep EG Black competing in ECL with Sean Gares, or not Sean Gares, Stanislaw and Rush, because Stanislaw and Rush are too old and would raise the average age of the team up too much to the point where you wouldn't be able to compete in We Play. So you would have to look at EG White being the team competing in We Play. So again, you would have to reconfigure the entire roster. Um, I still think that in an ideal world, that is the best case scenario. That EG White participates in We Play, EG Black participates in the ECL, and that way you have both teams competing in leagues, competing in areas where they wouldn't really be able to compete normally, because you could consider the ECL team can again go and compete in other international. You can send them to boot camps and stuff and give them resources they wouldn't have available, and whatnot. So I think that would be the ideal setup. Unfortunately, though, I looked at the rule book for We Play, and the age range for the average age. You can have one exception to this, but the age range for the players, um, the five players, each player must be between ages 16 and 21. You can have one exception to that. So obviously, that just comes with so many problems, because that's like you would have to reach into like mid tier 2 to bottom tier 2 somewhat. I mean, maybe even there's a few players at the top of tier 2 NA, but there's not many players that fit that 16 to 21 year gap. And if you send some of these players when they're 16 or 21, first off, you have a whole bunch of logistical problems there. Um, when it comes to like whose family is going to be like, yes, I will allow my child to who is 16, 17, 18 years old to go on a, trip for a Counter-Strike for a video game roster to go fly to some country in like Asia, Europe or Asia or wherever We Play is being held, and compete in an event there to get bodied probably, because NA tier 2 compared to EU and Asia tier 2 is just nothing. Um, you know, let them go to an international event and get absolutely bodied, just to, you know, um, it just seems like a ridiculous premise. Like, how are you going to get 16 and 17-year-olds to get, you know, to not only want to by themselves and have the resolve and maturity to want to do that, but also like, how are you going to let the parents do that? Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So it sucks. I don't think it's reasonable to expect. I understand that. I still think it's the ideal scenario. Um, I don't really know what other solution you could have, but it just begs the question: what's the point of having a second roster? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. EG White hasn't done anything other than boot camp. They boot camped again with everybody else, but like, there's no events they can go to, and if they just keep going to qualifiers for events, you inevitably face the problem where they either would have to not play because they'd be competing against EG Black or the main EG roster, and they won't be able to compete. Like, I understand it's giving these players resources that they wouldn't have normally, and obviously I'm sure those players would much rather compete under EG because they're getting paid salary and they don't have to worry, they don't have to worry about other things that they otherwise would have to, um, in their daily lives and whatnot. But like, it just seems like a really poor. It wasn't very well thought out. I don't think. I don't really understand what the whole point of the rosters having two rosters is. One roster makes sense. Two doesn't make any sense. So I don't know what their plan is for EG White. But I hope they do something. I hope it develops into something, because right now it's not looking too good. And I hope it isn't to just sell them when a team comes over from Valorant or something that they want to to offload, right? Although I do think it's a very strong possibility that it happens. Um, so yeah. Anyways, guys, that's going to be it for this episode. I think I've talked about everything I want to talk about, including the bonus topics, which is good. I didn't change the topic for any of these, so it's going to be a pain in the you know what. I don't even know why I'm saying that. It's going to be a pain to like have to go through this VOD, man, and timestamp this stuff. But you know what? It's fine. I'll figure it out. But anyways, yeah, lots of stuff to look forward to. Dota 2, TI. You got TI group stage wrapping up. You've got the ECL playoffs and for EG Black, and you've got the best of three against Fluxo, and the showdown in general to look forward to for the CS:GO main roster. So and we'll probably get an official announcement on the Valorant roster this week, or at least on a few of the players, because if they're doing those contract like tweet things, I'm sure George Geddes is gonna probably come out with something regarding the roster, I guess. So yeah, other than that, guys, I think that's everything, and I'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks for watching.